We love Zencaster because it allows us to record the audio for our podcast and create the video segments we use for our weekly Sister Scoop episodes. Zencaster has helped us make content capture simple.
It's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencaster. Log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests, and feel a sense of zen knowing Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable.
If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencaster's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast in one place and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code SistersAssembled, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
Katie and I are always hungry, and one snack we both love is beef jerky. That's why we're so excited to tell you about one of our favorite jerky brands, Matt Hat Jerky.
Matt Hat's delicious taste makes it a great snack, and the variety of flavors, including original, black truffle, and my personal favorite, roasted garlic, means there's a flavor for everyone. Plus, it's local to the area where we grew up in, which we just love.
Use the link in the show notes below to get some Matt Hat Jerky for yourself, and make sure to use our coupon code SistersAssembled for 10% off. Hello and welcome to Sisters Assembled, your home for all things MCU and MCU adjacent. And today we're continuing our MCU adjacent coverage with a little bit of a look at what could be coming down the pipeline for maybe not so much necessarily specifically the Venom franchise, but symbiotes in general at Sony now that the Venom trilogy has completed. So, with that tight little introduction, I'm going to kick it over to Kate to start us off because it should be interesting to think about where this might go over the next few years.
It really should be. And I think a huge factor in all of this is the fact that at the end of the day, these are going to be Sony made. And we have to remember that because it's going to be led by Sony, it's Sony's last stake in the game regarding really superhero movies and huge. I mean, obviously, Sony makes a lot of other movies, but like huge franchise type of things. Spider-Man and his characters are their last stake in the game. So keeping that in mind, you kind of can think a little out of the box here, right? Because if it was Marvel, I would probably be like, well, it's done. I mean, if it was Marvel, they wouldn't have been made, to be quite frank. And that's not to say one way or another whether they should have been or whatnot, but that's probably a fact. Versus, with Sony, again, it's kind of the last few things that they kind of have in regards to Spider-Man. It's one of so far, because we haven't finished the Spider-Verse trilogy, it's the only trilogy that's been finished and actually was relatively successful. So I think factoring all of that in, while we talked a little bit about it during our King in Black episode, I think it's important to look at the two paths that the symbiotes can go now that the Venom trilogy itself is finished. One is, Eddie Brock comes back. Whatever Tom Hardy's been saying is not true, or they get him back for whatever, and they go forward. They make more. They make either another trilogy or whatever they want to do, and they do the whole Venom thing again. The other thing is they set up the possibility to have a whole other, it doesn't have to be a trilogy, but at least a whole other movie based off of another symbiote that is clearly still in existence in this universe. So I think those are like the two paths the movie that itself has set up. But I also think if we ignore King in Black in general, the symbiotes have their own story. There's more to them than Venom. Venom is like the gateway to everything. But at the end of the day, there are so many out there. We saw that in this movie. Obviously, in its own way, a lot of them died. So I think that's kind of a question we have to talk about. But I do think there's three paths here that we can kind of discuss to see what happens next from this.
Yeah, I would agree. I think let's start with potentially the most straightforward, which would be, we do bring Eddie Brock and Venom back. I think, they called it The Last Dance. The whole thing was supposed to culminate in them kind of, for lack of a better term, breaking up. But really, it's just they were no longer able to be together because of the codex and the risk that posed for Null, right? Like at this point, we've all seen the film. Ideally, there's a spoiler warning in the show notes, so you hopefully know not to listen to this unless you've already seen the movie. But that's just a quick reminder. That's why they broke up. But at the end of the day, they did kind of walk that back by having that end credit scene where it looks like Venom has kind of bonded with a cockroach. There's a piece of him still surviving. And I know we talked about in the reactions, how much does that piece of Venom know? I think it was actually in relation to the 616 piece that's also existing, but I think it can be applied to this piece that, seems to have survived as well. Like, how much does that piece still remember? And how much of that is the version that was bonded with Eddie, or are we starting at net zero? I think that's part of it. But then also, like, just generally, if we're going into King in Black, you need an Eddie Brock. And I know we've talked about, is it this Eddie? Is it Tom Hardy? Or does it get recast for a 616 specific? I think if you're Sony and you're setting up Null, it's going to potentially be this Eddie. I know I said differently last episode, but the longer I've sat on it, I think I have kind of come around that, like, this is the Eddie that we know. This is the Eddie that has set this up. It would kind of be weird to almost do a bait and switch. So I've changed my mind on that since last episode, but
That's literally what I said last episode too.
I know because you changed my mind. You made good points. Like, I'm a big enough girl to remember, to give credit or change my mind when I'm wrong. And I do think I was wrong in that sense. And I think that would be the way to go, is either, you do something with that piece of Venom that was insinuated still survives, and either that's a whole new storyline because he has to get his memories back, or he refines Eddie or whatever, or you do King in Black, and maybe those come together. Maybe those aren't two separate paths, but Eddie's also now in New York, so knowing that King in Black, there's a lot of that takes place in New York. It feels like that's what we're going towards. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm netting on the Eddie thing, including my little change of heart.
I think I actually need to clarify my points when I geared this up. There are three options, but I think this option has like two sub points and two sub paths, I should say. We do have the option of it being Eddie. And I think that is a point you even say they kind of retcon that in their own movie. One, because you have Venom survive, they made that pretty much the assumption that we all see with the cockroach, and you're like, okay. And then two, this was a complaint I had in the reactions episode, but when we're looking ahead, if that's the plan, it's not a complaint anymore. If it's going to end here, it's a complaint. You moved Eddie to New York. You finally put Eddie Brock in New York City. That being said, if there's a future, you're setting it up as far as I'm concerned, because Venom's still around. You make a good point regarding, what does Venom know? What does that little piece of Venom know? I don't know. It would be kind of interesting if we got a different version of Venom with that Eddie. But the other path here is that we get a different version of Venom with a different person. It's not Eddie Brock. And that is something that honestly I wasn't thinking about, because it's always been Eddie. Let's be real. Even in the comics, and now Venom does take on many hosts. Obviously, we do know Peter Parker is one of them. And maybe in some weird way, there's a version here that Sony's trying to do, and I'm not even gonna articulate it further because I don't even want to put it out there. I mean, I do, but I don't. But I'm not even gonna go there. Regardless, Venom takes on several different hosts. It doesn't have to be Eddie. Obviously, these movies it was Eddie, but you left Venom there. He doesn't have to go back to Eddie.
Yeah, I mean, especially if, let's say, he is a blank slate, he's not even going to know to look to Eddie or look for Eddie. And I think if there's an opportunity to go to, a different host, I think there's a chance to play up, like, for Eddie, that emotional, like, he lost a friend, right? Like, can you imagine what it would be like for him to see, oh, hey, out in somewhere in the West, like, there's this symbiote guy swinging around and, like, doing stuff. And he's like, that's my guy. Like, my guy is here. And he has no idea who he is. Like, that could also be really interesting and almost like a really, really sad passing of the torch, and truly cementing that the Eddie and Brock combo that we know and love is no longer what it is. Like, it no longer exists. It is now this new version of Venom with whomever he decides to bond with. I do think that's an option. I kind of hope that's not how they go, to be honest. I think if we're gonna, set Eddie up in New York, I would rather see him be Venom. I don't know how that works with King in Black. I think where I'm getting stuck is if we go extrapolate that then into King in Black, he's still existing in a completely different universe from the rest of our heroes. And that's where I'm like, I don't know how you're going to make this work.
See, my thought process here is I'm not worried about King in Black. I'm honestly sitting here, and anything I'm going to say on this episode is there's no factor of King in Black as far as I'm concerned. We did an episode on King in Black. We talked about where everything adds. We talked about our thoughts. I think I'm more trying to figure out if that's not where we go. Or if you haven't listened to the episode, I think we both came to the conclusion you can't just do King in Black as like a Spider-Man movie or a one-off Sony movie. You really can't. It's not meant to be. It's like Secret Invasion. You cannot water this down. And so I think going off that conclusion, my brain's like, I'm not even thinking about King in Black. I'm not going to worry about it. Worrying about what Sony instead is going to possibly do, because I don't think they're going to sit here and do a King in Black movie themselves. I can see them picking up the Venom storyline. And you said the point that kind of set all that off was he is in a different universe. They can do whatever the heck they want to do over there. It doesn't need to add to any King in Black storyline that could end up happening in 616, which it still has the potential to do. I just think if we take that factor out of it, there are a lot of still really interesting things that could happen that has nothing to do with that storyline.
I hear what you're saying for the other two routes that you talked about, but I think when it comes to Eddie, because of the nature of this film and the storyline of King in Black and how involved he is, any future story that he and Venom, or even like Venom with a different host, which I think would be a waste, but whatever. I think any future story that they're going to be in, if it's Sony, because again, remember, Null was set up in Sony. So even if you're thinking like Null 616 MCU, like that's not even where he's been set up so far. Anything relating to them would have to eventually lead to King in Black. I think the other two we can talk about, they could be more of like almost sequestered in like symbiote storylines and almost the way that Venom has been, like insulated from other wider things other than his few crossovers into 616 briefly. Those storylines work. But I think if you're going to talk about these two characters and know that potentially King in Black is on the horizon, you have to view them as a trajectory and you can't view them in a vacuum.
See, I don't agree. I think we already did that idea. And I'm here to try and talk about if that's not how this pans out. Because let me tell you, I watched things like Madam Web, which clearly had something I thought could pan out. And Sony was like, what? Making sense? I didn't know you could do that. And went a completely other route. So I'm happy to take it and talk about it outside and see the different possibilities. Because at the end of the day, I cannot put the eggs in the basket that is going to be King in Black.
I disagree. We're just going to have to agree to disagree on this one.
Well, I say all of this to say because even if the Venom symbiote goes back to Eddie, we have to remember there was a whole conversation about the hive mind. I don't know what that's going to look like if the Venom symbiote comes back to him as a little piece of him. I don't. But there was that whole bit about the hive mind and what the symbiotes know. The reason Venom has the abilities he has comes from Spider-Man. This symbiote found a Spider-Man somewhere. I don't know where, but he had the abilities. So that's comic origin, guys. Like that is just straight facts. The Venom symbiote, actually, specifically this symbiote, but I do think there's more of a factor because if you think about like Carnage is a child of Venom, so that's why a lot of them take on more of the Spider-Man look because they have that ability put within them. But specifically, Venom cannot do anything until he bonds with Spider-Man and takes his abilities. Obviously not away from him, but mirrors them. With all that being said, I also do want to talk about the option of it being somebody else. Because there are some interesting people, and in respects that this is Sony, and Sony does not have the right to some of these characters as I list them. I understand that, but I would like to share some of the options and some of the people who have taken on the Venom symbiote. The first is Deadpool, just for fun reference, and also maybe to think about in the MCU, just for fun reference. Multiple Man, I don't know who that is. Spider-Gwen has taken on the Venom symbiote at one point. Carol Danvers has taken on the Venom symbiote at one point. Flash Thompson has taken on the Venom symbiote. The Guardians have taken it on, but Guardians as a group, I don't really understand how that one works, but they have. Human Torch has taken on the Venom symbiote, and so has X-23. That being said, clearly quite a few of those we cannot factor into this. Flash Thompson we can. Even Spider-Gwen we can.
Yeah.
There are options there. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I would say like, and we'll talk about the other two, obviously, but I would say if we're ranking the 3 options, this one is my if you're gonna force me to go King in Black, agnostic, this one is my least exciting option
I
because
agree.
I think the other 2 are more interesting, and, like, it feels like if we were to do a 4th Venom movie with Venom and Eddie, like, I don't know how different it would be from the first trilogy, so I just
No, and
think
the idea I think they had, they used. Like, I think you could have made an entire movie based off of the other symbiotes and him interacting with them and everything, but you used that idea and ran away with it for this, which was fine. I enjoyed it, but you lost the ability to get to know these other symbiotes, to explore more of the other symbiotes like that. You lost it because you used them in 20 minutes in this movie.
yeah, and you killed them all, or, like, 80% of them.
Yeah, so I don't think I could see, to your point, what a fourth movie with specifically to Eddie and Venom would look like. I think we all already had concerns about this one because we were like, so hey, are you just going to make the exact same movie you made for the first two? Because was that not the issue with Carnage? It was exactly like the first one. So I'm glad they didn't do that. But yeah, I don't know what would come next. I don't really know what bigger thing they do within this universe and with the stories that they've set up because there are a lot of stories around the symbiotes, guys. There really are. But it's like takes a lot more world building than just being like Eddie and Venom, Eddie and Venom. Like you can't just be in this little secular area. You need to build a lot more, which they haven't built in the 3 movies that have come out. They've sort of tried to start to build it in the 3rd movie, but the first 2 live in their own world essentially. They don't build any of the like any of the foundation you need for these bigger symbiote stories that do exist. And there are bigger symbiote stories that could be cool, but we're not there. We would need at least a whole movie just to start building it properly before we get to the real stories. If Venom ends up taking on a different host, I think it could be interesting. I think it's a solid way to make more. And I'm thinking like Sony here. I think it'd be a solid way to make more movies. You keep the Venom name, but it's a different host. I mean, Cap's kind of doing that with passing down the mantle. We now have Sam Wilson with his first movie coming out next year as Cap. That's Cap 4, technically. It can be done. You have some interesting options. Personally, I'm waiting for a live action Spider Gwen. Kind of could be cool. I won't lie. We don't have a Spider Man supposedly in this universe, but what if we have a Spider Gwen? Like, I could see the options. But to what you said, I agree. I don't think this is my favorite option by any means.
Yeah, totally.
The other very clear option, and my personal favorite, is the other one that I think they set up here in the movie, in The Last Dance, and that's Agony and Dr. Payne. I really like this option. I think this is actually a better way to almost pass on the mantle because it's not Venom. It's a completely different symbiote that we can explore and have different storylines with. And Agony is pretty freaking cool. Looks pretty awesome. I have to say, they did a really, really great job with, if you look up what Agony looks like in the comics, like they did a really awesome job bringing her to the big screen. And, you know, I won't say Dr. Payne was my most interesting character that I felt was on the screen at the time, but I was intrigued by her. I would kind of be intrigued to see more of her and kind of what she would do with the symbiote because she clearly like is very scientifically interested in them. It doesn't necessarily have to be a trilogy. I think make a first one, you know, see how that plays out. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I think I'd like to see it happen.
Yeah, I would agree. This is definitely of the 3 options, I think my favorite option as well. It's the most clear. It's the option with the strongest foundation, I think, based on what was set up in Venom 3. I think something else, I was doing a little bit of research on Agony and Dr. Payne, and one thing that came up that I thought was interesting is Dr. Payne's supposed comic counterpart, because it's a man, so it was kind of a gender swap, and it's not necessarily a one for one, but the person that she is, everybody kind of thinks that she's built off of, this character in the comics, is actually both a Moon Knight and a Venom antagonist. So that's actually super interesting as well. Especially because if you think about the way that she is painted in this film, and obviously, like, there's room for creative liberty between what happens in the comics and how that is portrayed on screen, but she is very much an ally here, whereas her comic counterpart is very much not. I'm talking Dr. Payne, not Agony necessarily herself. So that is super interesting as well. And I think, too, one of the things that I was looking at for Agony specifically is that she's actually a member of the Thunderbolts under Fisk at one point. So I think if you look at these two storylines right there, I mean, granted, you have to take some of these with a grain of salt because of rights limitations and how much is Marvel going to allow them to collaborate. I just want to use them as examples of like this character has a life of her own in the comics, both the doctor and also the symbiote. And I don't actually know if in the comics they are actually a symbiote pair or if this was just kind of like done in convenience.
I have to say, when I was reading more of the background on Agony, there's a whole lot that happens with this symbiote. To start, this is one of four, I believe, or
I think
five
it's
of.
5.
I think it's five, including Carnage, but Carnage is kind of his own thing. But the other four tend to be lumped all together. And these, so technically, Venom has five children, if you will. We obviously saw Carnage come to fruition. He was born of Venom. Technically, Agony is one of Venom's children. So I think that in itself is like very interesting. But there was so much storyline that I never got to the part where the two of them are host and symbiote. It's possible they are. I don't know because there was a lot going on. I know there's also a whole storyline that revolves around the Guardian symbiotes, which are the four children of Venom, with the exception of Carnage, and just kind of that whole idea. And they're dealing with the Life Foundation, which I think is kind of interesting to kind of add into all of that. So I think there are enough pieces that overlap that we could make this work, and I could see it. And so it would be very interesting. Like I said, technically a child of Venom. Don't think that's the direction they went with Venom, the movie itself. It didn't
Yeah.
seem like Agony was a child of Venom because they already had the symbiote. I don't think Venom was making multiple symbiotes by accident. I know Carnage was born of him and then Toxin was born of Carnage, but I don't think like the other ones were. And just for reference, we actually did get to see a good number of the other ones in the movie. They never really named them, but they're kind of, you could tell by their looks if you look them up that it's the attempt to make them look like that. So we did see Phage and we saw Lasher. I don't think we saw, well, we did see Riot because Riot was in the first movie. Wasn't that Riot?
Yes, because here's the thing that I wanted to point out about the first movie. You brought up the Life Foundation. That
Yes.
is the foundation for Riot. So the Life Foundation does canonically already exist within the Venom movie universe. It obviously ran into some challenges after he blew up their rocket, but that's not to say that they haven't been rebuilding quietly underground. And also, one thing that we definitely harped on a lot in our reactions was the fact that it's only been a year that they've been bonded. So it's very realistic to think that, everybody just assumes the Life Foundation is gone and then all of a sudden they come out of nowhere and here they are. They've rebuilt, they've quote unquote rebranded, but not necessarily like that's true in terms of practice. So they could very much come back in play. I do think one thing that gets a little interesting is the Life Foundation is actually the ones who create the Guardian symbiotes through Venom.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't remember how the US government got these symbiotes. I think we do find out at the one of the end credit scenes of Venom 2 cuz I feel like we've seen that before. I could also be making that up though cuz I've only ever seen it once. But I don't know if like that was something that maybe the Life Foundation did, like, and they're gonna retcon that they did that off screen, and when they collapse as a company, the government seized control of it, and that's how that happened.
Yeah.
That's entirely possible. But I did just want to point that out because that does already exist. It is something we've seen already, and to your point, we've already seen Riot from the first movie.
Yeah, and then like I said, the other two were supposedly one and two of the other symbiotes that we saw during that final battle. So you have technically seen all five of Venom's children, if you will, which I think is pretty interesting. And like I said, there's a lot more that goes into this storyline in itself and the Guardian symbiotes and everything else, which could work. I mean, Riot might not exist anymore, but we could swap in Toxin if we really wanted to for Riot, which we have talked about being like, hey, where's Toxin? Because he like abandoned his host clearly because the host was dying. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but like you could swap him in and maybe other parts of the symbiotes did survive, just like Venom survived. And now we do have Phage and we do have Lasher, and there are others too. So like it doesn't need to be perfect, but I mean, there's a reason Agony I feel like is the one that is still there, and that's because she's a part of these other storylines.
Agreed. And I think, we talked about there being 3 options, and I think 2 and 3 almost go hand in hand, right? Because Agony is like a doorway
Yeah.
essentially into wider symbiote storylines because she is a symbiote who isn't Venom, who has distinct storylines and multiple, plot lines and hosts and things like that. And, is a part of the Thunderbolts. That's like a team that's not a symbiote team. So I think, when you're thinking about the three that we kind of teed up, I would almost consider it like two and a half. It's like, what does Agony open up in terms of wider symbiote storytelling? And who are the other folks who, maybe they died or there's still pieces left, like TBD. Although, I mean, a lot of them got shredded by those xenophage things, and that was
Yeah, but I guess I
disgusting.
don't really understand how that worked because technically couldn't the symbiote still be fine?
I have no idea. I don't know how those xenophage things work. They were disgusting. But anyway, that's how I would view it. It's like two and a half different options depending on how far they go with Agony. Like, does she get a solo film where she's doing her own thing with the doctor? That's an option. Maybe then if they go further to your point, like, and the first film does well and they greenlight a second, that's when you start to talk about the Life Foundation coming back. And maybe that's an Easter egg in that first film, and then we're starting to talk about teaming up the guardian symbiotes and those types of things. So there are options. There are options.
Yeah, I definitely think there is. I have to say, the only option that is not on the table, but I think would have been the best option for them, would have actually been Carnage. If you don't want to set up the million and one symbiote storylines and just everything that goes down with that, because to your point, Agony's a gateway. You really can't tell a lot of those stories. She's not like Venom. Venom stands on his own a lot.
Yeah.
So's Carnage.
Yeah.
If you don't want to go down that route, and you don't have to, they can change it. I get it. It doesn't have to be that Agony does go into all of this stuff and the Guardian symbiotes and all that. It doesn't have to be. To our knowledge, they've already changed the fact that she comes from Venom. So it could be changed. But their best route would have been Carnage. Carnage alone has all of his own crap that he deals with in the comics. Lots of interesting things. I know if I do momentarily bring King in Black back onto the table, that is part of the start of that storyline, dealing with, the remnants of the things that Cletus and Carnage and all of that. That is like the very beginning of how all of that starts. Carnage could have been pretty interesting, I think. Unfortunately, that was a wasted second movie.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, how do you take Carnage and make him a single movie villain? I mean, it's actually disgusting. Like, I'm sorry. Like, he is Caitlin's childhood nightmare. Like,
Literally.
what are you doing?
And I am like a masochist because, like, I love to watch that kind of stuff purely to ruin my life. Like, that is why I watch horror movies. I got one guy, I'm not going to say it because I just don't want somebody to haunt me with this. Like, I can just see it. But I got one horror movie guy that, for unknown reasons, he gets me every time. But do I watch those movies every Halloween? Yes, I do. Of course I do. It doesn't matter. I love the pain of it. And I love Carnage. I wanted more. And the fact I wasn't even scared of Carnage in the Carnage movie just broke my heart.
And it's definitely writing, because you can't tell me that it's Woody Harrelson's fault. Like, that man is incapable of doing anything bad. So it was the writing.
Well, duh. But it's such a shame because really, this is my answer for everything. And I don't remember how that movie ends because, quite frankly, again, only watched it once when it came out and never watched it again. But my answer to everything is, well, like, how does symbiotes like completely die? Like, how do you get rid of them completely?
I mean, Venom survived.
Well, that's what I mean. And so theoretically, can we just argue that Carnage could just come back?
I mean, if they're really trying to do that, I'm sure they can justify anything.
Yeah. I mean, I'm only saying it because I could genuinely actually see a pretty, if done correctly, solid other trilogy come from a Carnage storyline. He's got his own stories. He is more of a one-off character like Venom where he can run away on his own. You don't need to tie him into other things and like do the work, You don't need to write the work to do it. There's comic origin for it.
And I mean, if MOM is anything to go off of, and I know this is MCU, but like, you can do a really okay. MOM is a bad example. If well, I was just thinking, yes, Raimi. There's a lot of synergies, but I'm thinking, Agatha all along. Like, it's shown that you can do in this case, it's a little mystical, but like a superhero genre piece in horror. And I
Yeah.
think that for Carnage, if you really wanted to do that, that could be really, really good. Like, it could be really scary.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people, because if you think about the way that the Venom trilogy started, it was a little bit more horror and it got a little funnier, way funnier as it went along. And, like, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, that's just the choice that they've decided to go with the tone. Not that the first one's not funny, but, like, they definitely turned up the dial. So if you wanted to, you could take some of those horror elements from especially the first Venom and dial that piece up and say, "Let's do Carnage, like, really, really dark, really, really scary." You could actually bring Raimi back into it, and I think that would be a really good match now that I'm thinking about it. I mean, Sony, are you listening? Because I'm just like talking and saying good things.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is in regards to MOM, the horror was the friends we made along the way because where was that? Where was that? There were like only 2 times that it was actually maybe a little scary and it was more of a jump scare than it was actually like horror. So yeah. But I liked that. And again, I don't think it's hard to retcon that kind of stuff to be like, "Oh, actually a piece of Venom survived." Like it's really not. I don't think it is. It's also not one of those things that's like you need to show it. Like if they were like, "We're gonna make Venom 4," I would have been like, "Dang, Venom survived." Would have never really questioned it. I didn't even need to know that he did. Didn't need that little piece at the end. So if they did that with Carnage, I would love to see it go that direction because especially if you're gonna go anti-hero version with Carnage, you gotta play your cards right, right? You gotta be careful because Carnage is not one that's ever known to toe the line. Venom is. He's able to be a hero. He's able to be a bad guy. Carnage is his own thing.
He's very solidly a bad dude.
Yeah.
Like, just pretty consistently.
Yeah. And so that being said, I feel like if you're gonna do it and you're gonna do the anti-hero thing that Sony's been doing with every single one of Spider-Man's villains, because I guess they think that's gonna work. I don't know. Regardless, make it horror. Make it nasty. Make it worthwhile because he don't take that from him. Don't water him down again. Make it something that's different. And okay, maybe you're not going to get your casual goers because they don't want to see that kind of stuff on screen. I don't care. I'll be there. I'll be sat in that seat. I want to almost pee myself in that movie because that is what Carnage needs to do.
I mean, and honestly, like, you're also, if you go with my route and go, Raimi directing, you're gonna get the Raimi fans, right, who love his horror stuff. He also has a history with Sony and Spider-Man overall. Then you bring in one of the scariest Spider-Man villains of all time, in my humble opinion. And I don't even care if you bring Woody Harrelson back. I mean, I think you should, but I think he can do it. Like, I don't think he's the problem. I think you get Raimi in there, you write something really freaking scary, and you go for it. And you absolutely let him do his thing. You don't water it down like you did MOM from the horror perspective. You don't water down Carnage like you did from Let There Be Carnage. You let Raimi go ham, and you just absolutely make that brutal. And I think you're going to find an interesting cross section of, fans that are, yeah, probably some of the more diehard comic fans, fine, whatever. You're not going to get the casual goer, like you said, but you're also going to open it up to maybe people who are just interested in horror in general and couldn't care less about, the comic book piece of it. You could easily do a quick 2-minute scene of the end of, Let There Be Carnage, and there's a piece of Carnage that survives on a wall. Oh my gosh, and now he has a new host. Like, it literally is so easy, and it's such low-hanging fruit if done correctly, and could be a really interesting new direction for them to take that's going to create diversity from the Venom films and not rehash those all over again.
Exactly. And the other thing is not rehash the same movie you've made 4 times now.
Yeah, agreed.
Because that's what you've done, guys. Like, I hate to break it to you. And as much as I actually genuinely am looking forward to Craven in a few weeks, hello, I think it's going to look exactly the same as Morbius and Venom and Madam Web. And what's the other one? Am I missing
I think
one?
that's it. No, I
Oh my
think
God.
that's
It just
it.
feels like it's just, I feel like there's so many.
Well, because there's multiple Venoms, that's why.
Maybe that's yeah, I just feel like they're just pulling everything out of their butt. But I agree. I think it would be a very interesting perspective. I think as far as where the Venom story could go, it's new. It's not the same. We're not playing with that. If you don't want to go into more of the symbiote stuff, that's fine. You don't have to. You don't have to. You can make some really crazy crap. Even like some of these weird aliens. Listen, I'd go watch that. I would. So that's like a perfect scenario. That will never happen, unfortunately.
No.
But that would be a perfect scenario. That would be my favorite way if you're going to make more of these because you want money. That's what I would do.
Oh, I totally agree. I think if you go too deep in the symbiote storylines, you're going to lose anybody but the diehard fans because those are not casual movies. Like, I literally could not understand with the 6 different host changes and all of this stuff. Like, what was happening. And as you guys know, we have a pretty decent understanding of the comic book realm, you know? So if we can't understand it, you're casual, and this is not to be condescending at all. It's just like if we can't understand it as people who regularly live and research within this space overall, your casual fan who isn't doing the research is going to be like, what am I watching and why is this so confusing? And that's not a fun experience.
Well, you'd have to, in the better terms, I'm sure there's better ways to say this, but you essentially have to dumb it down.
Simplify it could be another way to say that.
Yeah, well, but like that's what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
I just meant not even as a whole, but like to put it on the big screen, you'd have to dumb it down. Unless you're really going to commit to telling the story correctly, you have to make it 10 times less confusing. I mean, that's what Marvel has to do all the time, right? Like, they take storylines constantly that are bare bones of what they actually are, but they make them work for the big screen. Even for me, you'd have to dumb it down.
Oh,
I'm
agreed.
not
There's
going to
stuff
be able
that
to
I
sit in
do
that
not
movie.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be able to sit there and fully follow any type of this type of symbiote story on a big screen like that. You have to dumb it down.
Yeah.
It's simply what would have to happen. And that's not necessarily a bad thing sometimes, but when it's in Sony's hands, like I don't trust that to happen well. Like I'm looking even at Madam Web. Like I think that was one that, well, it was like both dumbed down, but also somehow so overdone
Yeah.
in
It was
another
both.
way. Yeah, it's like they dumbed down the initial storyline, but then like really upped the complexity of this brand new other storyline they were adding because they were like, we can't say she's a mutant, so they just like went ham trying to avoid that.
Well, they emphasized the wrong thing. They
Yeah.
put the effort on the wrong piece of the storyline.
Yeah. So that in itself was like, but even with this, like I think they had to dumb down Null.
Yeah.
I appreciate that they did that because I didn't
Agreed.
walk into that movie knowing really a lot about Null. I appreciated that I knew vaguely of him. I knew enough about him, and that's where they left it. They moved on. It just is going to have to be what would have to happen. Again, Carnage would be my favorite route. I think there's other routes to go. I think you purposely left Agony on the table for a reason. I think it's not worth doing the Venom symbiote again, but it's still an option if we have to. I don't know if there's going to be more, guys. I don't, but it's the possibility that they left the doors open if they wanted to do more.
Yeah. And only time will tell.
That's for sure. Knowing them, we'll have 17 more Venom movies, but we'll see.
Probably, unless Marvel finally buys them out and buys well, not buy Sony, because that's a lot, and that also may not be legal, but maybe one day they will buy the rights to the characters back and everybody can live under one comic house. That would be great. But on that note, and that little manifestation that we've just put into the world, this has been our probably final piece of coverage related to Venom, I would think, unless something pops up in the news over the next few weeks. So please make sure that you're following on your podcast platform of choice as we dive into some different topics and then crazily start talking about Kraven the Hunter. If you're looking forward to keeping up with us, definitely check out the website as well. Calendar's pretty much up to date through the end of the year, so that'll give you a good idea of exactly what we're looking to do over the next couple of months, or really 6 weeks, which is horrifying to say. Last but not least, if you are looking to support the show, our Buy Me a Coffee link is down below. Everything and anything that you might be open to doing is much appreciated on our side.
You guys can also give us a follow on our socials, which are linked down below in the show notes. We have actually just very recently joined TikTok as a podcast, so go check that out. It is Sisters Assembled Pod. So go check our TikTok out, go give us a follow, and just keep up with us there as well. And with all of that being said, we are wrapping up Venom. This will be the last episode that we are doing in relation to Venom, The Last Dance, at least for now, until maybe something else comes out about it. But we aren't quite done with Agatha, but kind of done with Agatha. We got to go back for something because there's been some things being talked about recently by Mr. Kevin Feige in relation to the Scarlet Witch. So we are going to be doing a whole episode on how Agatha all along has essentially set up the perfect little blueprint to get us the Scarlet Witch coming back, probably in time for Doomsday. Maybe Secret Wars. We'll see. But we'll do a whole episode talking about that, kind of going through really the path and the stepping stones to get us there. It's going to be awesome. We're going to bring all sorts of great research from the comics because the comics actually give us the entire blueprint, which I love.
We love.
So easy. Love it. So make sure you guys are joining us for that episode next week. It's going to be a good one. And until then, Marvel just blew your mind. So let's talk about it.